Hey everyone, and welcome back to Above the Tree Line. We are joined by the one and only Will Davis Jr.,
Thank God there's only one.
founding and
Hi,
senior
friends.
pastor,
Woo-hoo!
Austin
Hi, Lauren.
Christian
And Lauren
Fellowship,
Thurston,
and
ladies
Lauren
and gentlemen.
Thurston, not the founding and senior pastor.
But close enough.
So we're going to have a little bit of fun with this topic today because this can be somewhat of a divisive issue, but those
I
are
don't
the
know how
ones.
you think this is going to be fun at all. This is so dark.
These are the kind of topics that
my
I love.
gosh.
So the question that we received
Lord.
is socialism biblical? Is there a biblical basis for this just socialism in our society? Because there has been a rise in Christian evangelicals who are pro-socialism and they stand on the Bible as the reason why. So before we dive into this, I see those faces you're making. Don't make faces.
Oh, look at the time. I got to go.
The first question, let's start with, what is socialism?
Socialism is the belief that the process of gathering, producing, and distributing goods should be controlled by a central agency, and that equitability, the equal sharing of the fruit of that ought to be distributed as best as it can equally. It's okay. You can own private property. There can be layers of wealth. There can be classes. But it's the production, the gathering, the production, and the distribution process is controlled by a central agency that is then responsible for helping it get out equally. You can have private property. It tends to be a slow-moving machine versus other forms of socialism or communism that want to be really fast-moving and almost revolutionary. So it's got good principles in it.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
There's
What you're
nothing
saying
innately bad.
doesn't sound like a terrible thing just based on the definition.
Take all this with a grain of salt and take all of it in a vacuum, because when you put people in the middle of it is when it goes south. It works on paper. When you put people that are greedy or have evil intentions or warmongers, warlords who keep resources to themselves or whatever, corrupt governments, then it starts to break down.
Are you implying that there are corrupt governments in the world?
I'm saying it directly and overtly.
So that's the one thing. So socialism does necessitate a government that is ethical.
I think every form of government necessitates a government that is, any ruling of people requires an ethical government. But yes, if you're going to have this work, then that central agency has got to be pretty trustworthy and be driven by great motives.
So it's funny because like a lot of people, at least on the conservative side, will make fun of people and be like, oh, you're a socialist. And like it's an insult. But based on what you just said, I don't know why that's an insult if it's referring to the distribution of goods.
Well, because we're in America and we equate capitalism with Christianity.
Okay, let's talk about
life.
Let's
liberty,
talk about
and the pursuit
capitalism.
Of happiness. So we have almost like an American duty to go spend and make money and produce. That's the American way. We're built. Socialism and communism both were the result after the Industrial Revolution, late 1800s, and they saw wealth being not equally distributed. They saw classes developing. Saw people getting really, really rich, and
Some people are
getting
really, really poor.
And abusive laborers, and they said there's got to be a better way. And so socialism was the first response to that, and it was an effort to make things equal. Economists will argue that you've got to have a free market or capitalism to drive good, healthy economies. People have to be able to make money. They have to get rewarded for their efforts, and that will eventually get spread around. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But there is, in the West, Lauren, there's this equality between capitalism and Christianity. That we equate the Western way of life with the Christian way of life. And I'm not a socialist. I'm more of a capitalist. But I don't think we're guaranteed wealth and riches and happiness and comfort in Christianity.
Do you think the reason that so many evangelicals are maybe drawn to socialism, could it be because capitalism is associated with greed? And we're not called to be greedy. Like, what's the verse in Acts? Like, sell everything you own, take care of one another. That sounds like socialism.
Well, I think that maybe you've hit on something there, that maybe the Christians read Acts chapter 2 and Acts chapter 4 and see some might say utopian, others might say romantic but beautiful view of spontaneous sharing. There was
Yes.
no needy people among them in Jerusalem in that historically unique context. And they read that and go, let's do this.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't we do that? But the mistake is there's some great differences between what happened in Acts 2 and Acts 4 and what I just defined as socialism or even worse, communism. And
Yeah.
so
Well,
they're
let's
not the same.
differentiate socialism from communism.
In communism, the government controls everything.
Okay.
You don't get to own free property. Now, no communist government that I'm aware of has ever succeeded in owning everything. Even in the most extreme communist governments, there's still some examples of private property, but they're in cahoots with the leaders in the communist government. The difference between communism and socialism is the government controls the process, the government decides who gets the goods, and ultimately the goal is nobody owns anything. Socialism, you can own stuff. Also, communism tends to be innately atheist.
Interesting. Okay.
Because it typically involves a pretty tyrannical leader, and it also involves a manipulation of people, and it's awfully hard to have biblical values and treat people the way people are treated in communism. Socialism can have biblical values. Communism is a belief that this needs to be done through revolution and through bloodshed. Socialism wants to take its time. If you're patient, you can be a socialist. If you're impatient, you got to be a communist because they want it done today, and we don't care who we have to kill to do it. We're going to take it over, get the money, get the stuff in the streets, and help everybody and kick the people that own stuff out. They're bad, and we'll let the ruling class take over. The people are going to rule, but inevitably somebody rises to power and takes control of that and keeps it all for themselves. Have you ever been to Nicaragua? It's a socialist, communist country, and they treat the people, they want them poor, they want them uneducated, and want them desperate for the government. And while the leader sits in the palace loving his life.
It does seem like, so my my high school Spanish teacher, who I'm still connected with, she's from Cuba. And she can't stand communism. And she uses all of her social media platforms to, like, on a daily basis tell people, like, you're romanticizing this idea. I grew up with it. This is what it actually does to people. But I do feel like, especially amongst like young progressives right now, we hear a lot of this being talked about at the government level. Yeah, it is. It's romantic. But, you know, like, we grew up with the story of Robin Hood, where it's like, you know, the rich people, they have too much, and then there's the poor people, so we're going to take things from the rich and we're going to give it to the poor. So is socialism basically promoting kind of that idea?
To a degree. Anytime you take from somebody, we pay taxes, but we elected officials who allow us to pay taxes. We could argue about that. What you saw in Acts 2 and Acts 4 was completely voluntary and completely spontaneous. There was no central overseeing agency saying you need to give and we're going to take from you if you don't. Ananias and Sapphira, who show up in Acts chapter 5, had every right to declare whatever amount they wanted to, and they lied about it. So even in that system, there was corruption. Okay, there was not complete authenticity. Socialism is not voluntary, and it is not spontaneous. It's a structured system to try to bring equality, which doesn't typically work. What will happen in Acts chapter 2, which is so hard to recreate, was it was spontaneous, it was based on a perceived need, and it was completely voluntary. And that's why it's hard to reproduce. It was in a unique historical context. The church responded. I've seen examples of it in, like, when we had a bunch of Katrina survivors land here in Austin. All of a sudden, the old Austin airport hangars down at what used to be the Mueller Airport are filled with goods.
Yeah.
The church came forward and said, here, let's help these people. That was an Acts chapter 2 kind of moment.
Absolutely.
But if we said, okay, everybody in Austin has to bring 10% of what you own, and we're going to put it in this hangar and distribute it as we see best, now we're set for socialism and corruption at the same time.
So would you say that, like, the intentions behind socialism, at least like Christian socialism, which kind of came about in like the mid 1900s, like, the intentions behind it are pure, but really is what you're saying, it needs to be voluntary, not mandated?
I don't know of an example of communism or socialism that has worked well in history.
Right.
Because at some point, greed and evil and those other things creep in, and I remember going into a warehouse in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and this is not a good example because it's Haiti, and having to buy bags of rice from the Haitian government and markup that we had given
Right.
Haiti after the Clinton administration had given all this rice after the earthquake. We want to distribute it. It's in a warehouse. We have to go buy it back now at a markup at under gunpoint to give to people who it was intended for to begin with. That's what can happen. And so the spontaneous piece is the only overseeing body were the apostles, and they wanted to make sure everybody had care. And if you brought and said, here, give it, then you can distribute it any way you want to. But as the apostles go corrupt, then the thing breaks down.
Right.
And it didn't last very long. It wasn't that way forever. So I think it's hard. Jesus said, you're going to have the poor with you. We're not, and he also said, go take care of them.
Go take care of the poor.
Go take care of them. But I don't know that this romantic utopian idea, and there have been efforts by well-meaning people throughout history, especially in the late 1800s, to create utopian societies. They've always broken down.
Because people are involved.
Because people.
And people are broken down.
Yeah.
Yeah. It does. It makes me kind of sad because, like, on the surface,
It's a beautiful picture.
Yeah, like let's all take care of one another. And then the idea, like, I guess, is it wrong to where one person is allowed to be so incredibly wealthy in the same society where somebody else is so incredibly poor? Like, it's that chasm between those two almost seems unfair.
And I wrote a book. Here's a selfish plug, shameless self-centered plug.
You wrote lots of books.
I wrote a book called Enough that talked about the definition of enough in Scripture is if you have daily bread.
Yeah.
And there's more than enough and there's less than enough. And the people with more than enough have more than enough to help the people with less than enough get to enough. That's the equation. So if I've got more than what I need today in daily bread, which I do, my extra isn't for me. It isn't for tomorrow. It's for somebody who has less than enough today. That's why the book sold 3 copies.
I bought one of those
You're one of
copies.
those 3. Thank you very much. But so, for instance, if the Romans or the Jews had owned the upper room, Jesus wouldn't have been meeting in it. A
Interesting.
wealthy man,
Yes.
a wealthy man's tomb. If that tomb is owned by the community, Jesus is not getting Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. He gives people wealth to serve. The guy who owned the donkey, tell your master, the master of the Lord Jesus needs this donkey. Take my donkey. That was private property, and it was used up for kingdom purposes. So wealth isn't bad. People always misquote the verse, money's the root of all evil. That the Bible doesn't say that.
The love
of
money.
Money's value neutral. It can be either way. So wealth can be a really, I know some amazing people in the kingdom who have gajillions of dollars, but they're so generous with it, the kingdom is richer. They make money so they can give. It's what the gift of giving does. ACF started on the generosity of one man. He said, I will pay your bills for the next 2 years. Let's go. Let's start this thing.
Yeah.
And the church, he had resources to do it. Well, if he didn't have those resources, I'm pretty much betting the city of Austin's not going to pay to start this church.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Yeah. So is the concept of private property, you've brought that up a couple of times, is that biblical? Is there a biblical basis for ownership of private property?
I don't know that there's a moral yes or no attached to it. It's clearly a biblical reality in the Old Testament. When someone violated your property, broke something of yours, lost your ox, there was a requirement to pay it back.
Yeah.
So I think the Bible expects that there's going to be property and never lobbies in any way. Even the Apostle Paul worked at tent making to meet his needs and to provide for himself. So I don't think there's anything negative in Scripture arguing that we shouldn't own things.
Well, I mean, the commandments, like thou shalt not steal. If you don't have any property, then that doesn't need to be a commandment.
Look at how God chose to bless Solomon with all of his wealth and all of his riches because of his humble heart. So I don't think you can build a case that owning things, even a lot of things, is bad unless it pollutes you. It is awfully difficult, Jesus said. He didn't say impossible. It's awfully difficult for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. But he didn't say it was impossible because money can blind you.
Right.
That's why you release it. That's why you give it away because you're going to get more. If you release it and bless others, you'll just get more. When you take that enough and deplete your enough for somebody else, tomorrow you're going to have more than enough again because God can trust you now to be a funnel. If you're hoarding on to it, you're on your own.
Okay, so we've touched on this before.
This is fun.
But I also kind of want to, like, I've had somebody bring this up to me before. So the church is it's a welcome place for everybody to come to, regardless of your socioeconomic status. Like, the church is a hospital for sinners. So come. And there have been times where maybe some of our lower income friends drive on to property, and we live in a pretty wealthy area.
Very affluent.
And it can be a turnoff to some of those people driving in and being like, oh, look, Land Rover, Ferrari, like Mercedes. Should the church parking lot, is it okay for it to be
As long as they park
filled?
next to you, they're going to be fine.
Is it okay?
Your
Like,
little squeaky, whatever that
it's
thing
not
is you
squeaky. It's
drive.
an electric vehicle. It's not squeaky. It's taking care of the environment.
very
And we did an
crunchy.
episode
It's
about
very
the environment.
Crunchy. You have a crunchy
Okay.
car.
So,
Just park next to Lauren and you won't feel that way.
but is it like, should we be mindful of what that looks like? Like, is it okay for your church parking lot to look like a Tesla dealership?
I think that that's completely irrelevant. I think it's superficial to judge the heart of a community based on what they drive, and the fact that we happen to live or minister in an area where most of the people in the area have resources doesn't make them good or bad. And I think that there's a tendency to really lash out. Like I'll see an advertisement sometimes. You won't believe how much this religious leader makes. I'm like,
Right.
mind your own business.
Yeah. Well, should pastors have private jets?
Can we go to like snowmobiles maybe, or if I got a guy who's flying the globe a lot and he needs to get in and out, I don't have a problem with the pastor having a jet if he's using it, but he doesn't want to be. You ever flown on a private jet? Like you get on,
No,
you
I
leave.
never have.
You get on, you leave. It's so convenient. You get on, you go. You save so much time. And I think people that travel a lot, I don't have a problem with having a private jet.
Okay.
I flew on a private jet many times because the guy who started this church owned one. So we go to a meeting somewhere, or I flew up to do an emergency intervention for a funeral. He flew me on his jet up there. I didn't have to worry about getting a ticket. He threw me on this jet. So helpful. So I think it's value neutral. It depends on what you use it for.
Yeah. And how much you love it.
And how much you love it, and how much it gives you status,
Yeah.
and those kind of things.
Okay, so we digress.
Oh,
Private
boy, do we.
property.
Shocker, we
Okay, so
digress.
let's talk about Christian socialism.
Okay.
So one of the verses that Christian socialists use to support their viewpoint. So basically, Christian socialism is combining the idea of socialism with Christian ethics and morals, right? So one of the biblical passages that they use is from Isaiah. Learn to do right. Seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. And there's many, many others about like harvesting your field, selling your possessions. So these are all verses that we should be following. At what point does this, like, are they misinterpreting these verses if they're using them to support the idea of socialism?
I don't think you should have to have a government entity driving that. That's the difference. In socialism, you have a government entity driving that production process and the distribution process. And I think what the scriptures call for is this spontaneous, love-driven generosity that might be managed by a nonprofit or a church. We're going to distribute for you, but the giving, I go out and make a living. I produce it on my own. The government doesn't. The giving is generous and spontaneous and love-based. You don't have to have a government telling you to do it. That's the difference. And so I think that central agency of the U.S. or Cuba or pick your area, that's where socialism to me breaks down. You shouldn't have to have that driving force. And people say, well, then you've got inequity. Well, then let the Christians solve the inequity.
Right.
The
And
government
that's
doesn't
the
have to solve
piece
the
that's
inequity.
missing.
Yeah.
Like we talk about this
The
a lot.
church
Like
should
there
solve
wouldn't
that.
be a need
Yeah.
for all these government social programs if the church was stepping up and doing what they're supposed to
And
do.
let's be honest, in many cases they are. There's so
Yeah.
many. I remember going into the Gulf Coast after Katrina, and multiple pastors saying, if the church hadn't been here, nothing would have gotten done. The FEMA program wasn't set up well yet. The trailers were behind. They had mold in them. The government had red tape. The church just walked in and solved the problems. And the pastors all said, if the church hadn't been here, we'd still be in a
Right.
mess. That's what we should do.
Yeah.
We didn't need permission. We just went, and we got it done.
Yeah.
And if the government tries to organize it, it's going to look like New Orleans
Yeah.
after Katrina,
Right.
which is a complete mess.
So what about social programs?
Government-sponsored social programs?
Yes.
I think they're great.
Okay.
to a degree.
To a degree.
To a degree. Sometimes they're stepping in to meet needs that the church isn't. Like the foster system is a real unfortunate expression of maybe the government trying to fix a system that probably the church should take care of, but we haven't. There's probably a lot of that out there. But I think if a city has a benevolent side to it and wants to help the least of these, like I think what Lakeside does, we work at Lakeside Apartments down in Lake Austin, and it's the last stop before homelessness for special needs people in the city.
Disabled, yeah.
And the city does a great job of that. And we would love serving there. But it's a place they're caring about people. Our taxpayers go there. I have no problem with that. If it becomes corrupt and becomes, a place where abuse takes place or things are stolen or the goods aren't distributed the way they should be, which can happen, then it's got a problem. It's fine until people get involved. So keep that.
Yeah.
As long as people aren't involved, it's fine. When I
Right.
get in the middle of it, it's a problem.
Right. So if it's controlled by artificial intelligence, then
Thank you. Next topic.
that's another topic.
that's another
We actually do have some questions about artificial intelligence that
I'm
we
not
should
your guy
address
for
at
that
some
one.
point in time.
All
All right.
my intelligence is artificial. That's
There
all
you
I
go.
will say.
All right.
It's all fake.
Well, we are out of time on this topic.
Woo, good stuff, Lauren.
You know a lot about this.
You're surprised again.
Very learned,
Wikipedia
well-studied
is
man.
so good. I'm all about Wikipedia.
Well, guys, thank you so much for asking these questions. We know that they are relevant, especially to the world that we're living in now, and we know that there's a lot of propaganda out there.
Yeah.
And
lot
at the
of
end of the day,
politicizing.
go back to the Word of God and filter everything through that.
The answer in Christianity is never the government. It's always the church.
Agreed.
Know that. It's never the government. The better government is not going to make our world better. Better churches will. That's the answer.
That's a good point to
Boom.
end on.
Boom.
Drop the mic. Awesome. Well, thank
ya.
you guys so much for joining us. Keep the questions coming at acfellowship.org/podcast, and we will look forward to answering one of your questions next
See you
week.
soon.